me for my voice, but I have never seen anything like it.
Do you believe in miracles? Yes! Unbelievable.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, as always, Andrew Zimmel. I hope that everyone is staying safe out there. I hope that you guys not only are being able to wash your hands, but right now we are at a little bit over a week since the self-quarantine, the social distancing, the real epidemic, the pandemic has swept across our country. So in this last week, we've put out a lot of great content for you guys. The Alexander Haynes podcast that we did Wednesday night, up there for you guys on Thursday, up now as well, has been getting a lot of really good feedback. It's always good when my mom texts me and says, hey, that was a good podcast. When your first critics are your favorite critics, life can't get any simpler, guys. So we're going to get into it today. We are now at number 20 to 1. 19 through number 1 best players of the 2010s. These guys are undisputed. These are the players. This is the section that I expect the most pushback from. Right? I don't think anybody's arguing who's number 20 through 35. I doubt anybody even thinks that much about Yao Ming and Kyle Korver when we talk about best players of the decade. But this next section is the one that I think is going to ruffle some feathers. I will not be shocked if I get some mean texts and mean tweets from it. But 19 through 1 are the players that were cornerstone players for a franchise, were guys that wowed us on the court in the playoffs. They had incredible moments. These are the players who you want to go into the 2020s with as time continues. And it's going to be shocking because I have a very good argument for number 1 on this list, why I would still pick him to go into the 2020s with over a majority of the other players. So let's get started. At number 19, this guy starts his career with the Minnesota Timberwolves. I'll never forget when I opened up a Sports Illustrated and he was being compared to the legend, one of the greatest players of all time, Moses Malone, because of his ability to put up 20-20 games. He spread the floor a little bit. He was the first guy that I really remember being a stretch 4 and being very successful at it. Antoine Jameson, of course, is the godfather of the stretch 4, but this guy, I think, really perfected it. He comes to Cleveland and locks down Steph Curry on the biggest possession of Game 7. The defensiveness of Kevin Love has never been highly touted. Nobody ever thought Kevin Love was a great defensive player, but what he did in 2016, the fact that he was resilient, he's always dealt with some sort of either being banged up or his depression. He's always had something, a chip on his shoulder, some sort of ailment, and the fact that he's able to play through it to me is not only admiring, I don't not only admire the way that he plays, but it's inspiring. The way that he talks about his mental health, the way that he does everything. But let's focus what's on the court. On the court, almost 20 points per game and 11.5 rebounds this decade. He didn't make the playoffs when he was with the Timberwolves for good reason. The next best player on that team was Ricky Rubio. And while we thought Rubio would be the next great talent, you didn't hear his name when we were going over the top 84 players of the decade. 15.3 points per game in the playoffs, 19.7 rebounds per game. He is an outstanding player, and the fact that he has a ring only amplifies what he was able to do this decade. I don't think the Cavaliers go to 4 straight finals if it isn't for Kevin Love. Now, people will say that it mostly was LeBron James. People will say that Kyrie Irving helped carry that. Kevin Love doesn't get a lot of respect, same way that Chris Bosh doesn't get a lot of respect. But what I did when I was looking up Kevin Love's numbers is I went, let's look at what he did with the Timberwolves. Let's look at what he did with the Cavs. With the Timberwolves, he was a guy that was making all-star games. He was a guy that was banging down low. He could post you up. He could take you outside. He was grabbing offensive rebounds. He was throwing incredible outlet passes. And it's not a secret. If this guy was a scrub, you wouldn't trade the number 1 overall draft pick, Andrew Wiggins, for him. Kevin Love, underrated, I would say. I think a lot of people thought that he would be anywhere between 20 and 25, 20 and 35. But the fact that he's in the top 20 to me in my list proves to me, and should prove to you guys, that Love is a special player. Now, he's with the Cavaliers now, signs a big contract. He's the franchise player. I don't think anybody ever wants to be the franchise player in Cleveland. I think that you either get drafted there or LeBron James shows up and you want to go there to play with the king. But nobody ever is saying, I love Cleveland. I want to go play in Cleveland. Joakim Noah said it the best. You think Cleveland's cool? Ever heard of anybody vacationing in Cleveland? So Kevin Love is stuck there for the time being, but I still think that he's a top 20 player. He plays in two of the smaller markets when you look at the NBA, Cleveland and Minnesota, for the majority of his career. He puts up excellent numbers. First ballot Hall of Famer, in my opinion. He's a special player, 5-time NBA All-Star, 29 on the VORP. I love this guy. I think that he's a special talent. At number 18, recently crowned champion, most recent champion, especially if we don't get it playoffs going in the NBA anytime soon, Marc Gasol. Marc Gasol, the grit and grind cornerstone, the player who emphasized the way that Memphis Grizzly basketball needed to be played. He is going to have his number retired in Memphis the second that he retires from the game. He got grit and grind put into his championship ring with the Toronto Raptors. And can I just say that not only was he an integral part of that Raptors championship, but I want to say that the Memphis Grizzlies, outstanding organization. Outstanding. They're not going to be in the same conversations as the Golden State Warriors, San Antonio Spurs, even the Miami Heat, because they didn't win anything of value this decade. But I'll say this. What they won is something you can't quantify. It's something that you can't figure out in numbers. The nerds aren't going to be able to look it up and figure out the impact that grit and grind basketball did. But I'll say this for the Grizzlies. The Grizzlies maybe appreciate the different types of basketball. When you live in San Antonio, when you're watching the Spurs game in and game out, you think that there's one type of basketball that can be played. Everybody touches the ball. Everybody's moving. The beautiful style of game. A lot of post-ups. A lot of pick and rolls. Then you think, when you look at the bigger picture, the early part of this decade was a lot of pick and rolls. You're thinking Steve Nash. You're thinking Tony Parker. You're thinking Chris Paul. The LeBron Jameses, the Carmelos, the Durants of the world took you on isolation, might pull up from 30 feet. The Steph Currys of the world were just breaking into the NBA, superstardom, shooting threes. At the end of the decade, you're stuck with every team jacking up threes. But in the grit and grind Grizzly era, they did something that wasn't unheard of. Slow the pace down, bully ball. We're going to play tight defense. And I'll say that in 2011, when they knocked off the Spurs as an 8 seed, I was very impressed by that team. And when they went to the Western Conference Finals 2 years later, in 2013, granted there were some injuries in the Western Conference, but they still had to play the games. They still had to win the games. They still had to get there. Marc Gasol will always have a special place in my heart because he was a 400-pound fat boy who got traded for his brother. When he gets to Memphis, I don't think anybody expected him to usurp Pau Gasol as the greatest Grizzly of all time. But right now, if you ask anybody living in the Memphis area, if you ask anybody who's watched basketball in the past decade, they would all say the same thing, that Marc Gasol is the best, greatest, most influential player in Memphis Grizzlies history. So he's number 10 or number 18 on this list, putting up 15 points per game, 7.5 rebounds. He wins the title last year with the Toronto Raptors, averaging about 15 and 8. He wins a Defensive Player of the Year award. That's not something that you have. I think he's the highest Defensive Player of the Year when you look at winning only one. He's the highest rated single winner of Defensive Player of the Year. I'm just saying, I want to put it on the record now. Marc Gasol, 18 on the list. Love the guy. At 17, he hit the biggest shot in Cleveland Cavaliers history. I'll say this for Kyrie Irving. I wasn't a huge fan of what he did in Boston. Wasn't a huge fan of the things that he's doing in Brooklyn. But at the beginning of this decade, when he starts as a pup coming out of Duke, only playing 9 games, he comes in unproven in college, probably the least proven college basketball player to go number 1 in a long time. He comes in and immediately changes the game of basketball in Cleveland. LeBron James leaves, and nobody will ever fill those shoes, but Kyrie came very close. I remember sitting around the lunchroom table having conversations about Kyrie Irving, Shockingly enough, there were still Cleveland Cavalier fans around the country even after LeBron left. I'll give them that. I'll pat them on the back for that one. It's hard to do, to stick around Cleveland, be a fan of that team, even though they're not winning a ton. Kyrie comes in. Immediately, it's fun to watch. The Cavaliers franchise whiffed the next season, drafting Anthony Bennett. Then they get Andrew Wiggins, and then they, of course, swap him up for Kevin Love. All of a sudden, LeBron comes into town. Now Kyrie Irving's on a championship team. You can make the what-if argument that the Cavs could have won the 2015, should have won the 2015 title. Kyrie, of course, hurts his knee in that game 1. Warriors end up winning in 6. So Kyrie comes back in 2016. They go down 3-1. He is a catalyst. I think that he gets at least 40% of the credit to, if you want to do 50-50, I don't think that that's unheard of for the credit him and LeBron did carrying the Cavs back from 3-1. And then, of course, he hits the biggest shot in Cavaliers history, the step back over Steph Curry. If Ray Allen doesn't hit that shot in 2013 and Michael Jordan's final shot don't exist, if you wipe those both off the board, I'd say Kyrie's shot in the finals in Game 7 possibly would be the best shot in a finals game of all time. The influence Kyrie's had on the game of basketball can't be understated either. The fact that every young player now either wants to shoot like Steph Curry or wants to dribble the basketball like Kyrie Irving. There is a ton of guys in this league who have been rumored to be traded for, rumored to be moved. And I think that it says something that it took LeBron a season, not even a full season, to recognize how incredibly talented Kyrie was. Because I remember there being a talk about Chris Paul getting traded for Kyrie. Kyrie would go to LA, Chris Paul would come to Cleveland, LeBron would have his point guard, he'd have Kevin Love, he'd have proven veterans. Kyrie wasn't proven in 2015. LeBron didn't know if this is the guy who could carry a franchise with him, could co-carry a franchise. But I'll say this for Kyrie. He proved himself, and I'm super impressed by what he was able to do. 22.4 points per game in the regular season, 23.5 in the playoffs. Of course, ever since that 2016 run, he hasn't been the same when we talk about his influence on the game of basketball. But I'll say this. Kyrie, 17 on the list, super impressive, one of the best players of the decade. 16 and 15 are very special players. They both retired the same year. Both of them played 9 seasons this decade. Both of them had incredible finals appearances. But I give the edge to Dirk over Dwayne Wade. He's 15, Dwayne Wade's 16. But both of these players, it's funny how their careers are so intertwined. There's not been a player like Dwayne and Dirk who are so intertwined, not coming from the same draft class, not coming in the same conference. They didn't have multiple incredible playoff matchups. This wasn't a Knicks and Heat rivalry. This wasn't a Bucks and Cavs rivalry. This wasn't a Bulls and Cavs rivalry. This was two guys that only met up twice in the NBA Finals, but both of those finals appearances are so impactful that it's really hard to separate the two. But the reason we give Dirk the edge is because he was able to win the first title of this decade on an incredible finals run, and Dwayne Wade was more of a second fiddle, more of a Robin to LeBron when they won those 2 titles the following 2 years. So let's give it up for Dwayne Wade, who comes in at 19 points per game, 4 assists, 3 rebounds, 20 points per game in the playoffs, 4 finals appearances, 2 titles, giving us incredible playoff performances in 2011 and 2012. 2013, his body starts breaking down. By 2014, I think a lot of people around the league knew that his career was on the downslide. It took him a few more seasons before he came back to Miami and had it's moving on to month 24 now of his retirement tour, it feels like. But I'll say this. Dwayne Wade, the ultimate Heat, it's a shame that he doesn't go in the same conversation as Kobe Bryant and as Dirk Nowitzki, playing an entire career with one franchise. I'll say that his run with the Bulls and the Cavs, I don't think it diminishes what he was able to do in Miami, but it does, in my opinion, damper it a little bit, that he wasn't able to finish his career or wasn't able to play his entire career in South Beach. For Dirk Nowitzki, I give him the edge not only because of the Finals MVP, not only because of the incredible run he had, but the fact that we think back to 2006 with this guy who, if you want to say the refs cheated, you can. If you want to say that Dwayne Wade had this incredible Finals performance, I feel like that's a fact as well. But you go back to 2006, and I think that the consensus was Dwayne Wade was the better player. Dwayne Wade was the winner. Dwayne Wade had the Finals MVP. If they don't win that series, Dirk is the MVP. The next season, Dirk wins the regular season MVP, but then chokes in the playoffs against the Golden State Warriors and the We Believe Warriors. So Dirk's entire career coming into this decade was one of, oh, sure, he's a winner, but he's got one MVP. Duncan's got 2. KG's got 1. Well, Duncan's got 4 rings. KG just won a ring in 2008. Dirk has never won a ring. And he was getting left off a lot of lists. I think when we go into the 2011 playoffs, a lot of people were saying that Dirk is going to go in the same conversation as Karl Malone, the same type of conversation as Charles Barkley. He will be the 5. He'll be the center who never won a ring. Incredible career, an amazing player, but he just doesn't have it. Doesn't have the winner's mentality. Then he goes into the playoffs, knocks off the Thunder, knocks off the Lakers, goes into the finals as a huge underdog. And I want to give credit to Jason Terry, who didn't make this list. I want to give credit to Jason Kidd, who I don't think made this list either. When you look at the plays that they were able to make in that finals series and just the entire team around Dirk, it helped a lot. But incredible underdog story. His entire career up until that point, I thought that he was an underdog. He comes into that finals, wins it, and I'll say this for Dirk. Wasn't a huge fan of his being a Maverick. Wasn't a huge fan of the defense. Never thought that he was that impactful of a defensive player. But what he did in 2011 changed my mind a little bit. What he did at the end of his career, kind of coaching up some of the younger players, knowing that he wasn't going to be competing for an NBA title anytime soon, and just the resiliency that he had in Dallas and how he is, if you want to put him in the same conversation as guys like Staubach and Aikman, I think that he's in that conversation as the face of Dallas when you talk about an athlete. At least in the 21st century, I think that there is no athlete outside of maybe Tony Romo who has encompassed Dallas, who has been the face of Dallas more. So he's 15 on the list. Dwayne Wade is 16. Moving on to 14. And another one of those guys you might get a lot of pushback on, but I will say this. He's an NBA champion. You never can take that away from him. This career in Toronto is a weird one. They couldn't get past LeBron for the longest time. They never really could get past themselves. They choked in the playoffs. They fell apart. And then this season, or I should say last season, he comes in with Kawhi Leonard as his sidekick now. He gives the reins of the franchise over to him and says, all right, we're going to go as far as this Terminator guy can take us. And then when Kawhi gets into Game 6 of the NBA Finals, when, let's be honest, guys, you look back on that game, the Warriors were there the entire time. The Warriors weren't dying. Once you have the heart of the champion, that is something that they never can take away from you. I firmly believe that when you have played in an NBA title game, if you have been a competitive athlete, you know that once you have the taste of winning, that taste never goes away. The Golden State Warriors had won 3 titles. They had been in that predicament before. They came back from 3-1 against a vastly talented, top to bottom talented Thunder team in 2016. They had been with their backs against the walls before. They knew what single game elimination was. So when Kawhi Leonard's banged up in Game 6, when Pascal Siakam isn't hitting on all cylinders, when Steph Curry and Klay Thompson are cooking with gas, Kyle Lowry stepped up to the plate and had an incredible final series. And that is part of the reason why he gets moved up on this list. Because when you look at stats lie. Stats lie sometimes, but the eye test doesn't. And what Kyle Lowry was able to do for the majority of his career in Toronto, what he was able to do on that finals run they had last year, puts him a little bit ahead of the Dirks and the Dwayne Wades and the Kyrie Irvings of the world. Because he secures Toronto's first title. And when we talk about the importance of titles, when we talk about the impact of titles, no titles are built the same. Titles aren't made the same. They're not made the same for players. They're not made the same for organizations. The Spurs title in 2005 against the Pistons, incredible. The 2003 championship, amazing. But when you look at what happened in 2014, when you look at what happened in 99, those two titles mean a little bit more. Okay? Titles aren't all made the same. The Toronto title in 2019, knocking off the dynasty, stopping the dynastic run of the Golden State Warriors, that title means a little bit more, I think, than some of the other titles that happened this decade. So Kyle Lowry, 14 on the list. Jimmy Butler, 13. I'm going to tell you why. When Derrick Rose got hurt, I was one of the people who said Jimmy Butler is going to have to step up. Jimmy Butler is going to have to figure out a way to win. And they did that. Him and Joakim Noah did that. And then, of course, the front office in Chicago, because it is a toxic and cancerous situation, they messed up their money on that one, letting him go to Minnesota. They get Zach LaVine out of it. I like Zach LaVine. But Jimmy Butler's been incredible. He goes to Minnesota. He forces them to get to the playoffs as an 8 seed. That entire thing falls apart. He knows that they're not going to win a lot of games in Minnesota. Forces his way to Philadelphia. Again, kind of finds out rather quickly that Brett Brown and the 76ers aren't built for this. They're not built for the championship contention. Goes to Miami, and then this season he's been incredible. Butler has made 5 All-Star games this decade. So half the decade he's made an All-Star game. That's one less than Kyle Lowry. That's the same amount as Dirk when you look at the amount of All-Star games this decade. You look at his win share, it's 74. Again, in that range of the top 10, top 15 in this decade. His value over replacement higher than Kevin Love, higher than a lot of the other guys on this list. So I give it to him. I say that I think that Jimmy Butler is 13 on this list. If you want to fight with me, you can, but the two-way play, his ability to impact the game on both sides of the ball, his just grittiness, his griminess, the fact that he can get a shot off from pretty much anywhere, I think that he gets underrated a lot of the times because he wasn't Joel Embiid, he wasn't Ben Simmons, it wasn't his team in Philadelphia. In Chicago, they were starting to backslide. He knew it. I think fans knew it, that he can be the best player on a championship team at that point in his career. Goes to Minnesota. That's not his team. Karl-Anthony Towns, Andrew Wiggins, they're the homegrown stars. He's going to be always the sideshow. But in Miami, the culture fits him. In Miami, he's turned Bam Adebayo into an all-star. He has turned that Heat organization into a likeness of himself. And again, it's hard to quantify that, but I give him 13 on the list. At number 12, a guy who went to back-to-back Eastern Conference Finals, faced off against the Miami Heat. I firmly believe that if he doesn't get hurt in that weird accidental injury that happens, I want to say in 2014, when he hurts his leg, I would say that he would be an NBA champion at this point. Because I thought the Pacers were built for the long run. I thought the Pacers were built as a team that was going to compete for an NBA title. Shoot, they were right there. The Miami Heat were pushed to 7 games because of the Pacers team. Paul George ascended to superstardom, having to play in the shadow of Danny Granger, playing in Indiana, a smaller market. He is one of the best Pacers of all time. That's saying a lot. Those Pacers teams in the 90s were great. But if you made a starting 5 of Indiana Pacers, he would be the starting small forward. Okay? He goes to Oklahoma City. That was a weird relationship. Goes to L.A. Doesn't make the All-Star game this year. Do I think that he'll make an All-Star game again? Sure. But in this decade, he just was impactful enough in Indiana to put him where he is on this list. If I look at the numbers from the Oklahoma City days, it's not going to help his case a whole lot. I don't think that he was as important, as impactful, even though the media, even though the fans online tried to convince you that he was a all-star / superstar / MVP candidate. I think that you can be 3 of 3. You can get yourself on that list. But the problem is it's real hard, and I don't think that he did nearly enough to be in that MVP conversation last year. Not when Russell Westbrook was the best player on that team. Not when he was the motor of that team. You can't be the sidekick and win the MVP. Scottie Pippen's not winning the MVP. Kobe Bryant's not winning the MVP with Shaq. Dwayne Wade's not winning the MVP with LeBron. When you're the motor of the team, you're always going to get the benefit of the doubt. That's why when you looked at this 2019-2020 season, and the argument was made for Anthony Davis, is it LeBron is Anthony Davis? It's LeBron. He's the motor of the team. He's the thing that's pushing this whole franchise forward. He's going to get the benefit of the doubt. He's going to get the awards. Paul George went to Oklahoma City, got put in that 2 role, and that's where he's going to stay the rest of his career. Paul George will never be the best player on his team unless somebody gets hurt. If somebody gets hurt, that's a shame, but he'll never be on that list. The fact he got hurt as well holds him back a little bit, in my opinion. That's why he's number 12 on the list. Let's talk about another guy who gets hurt a lot, Blake Griffin. Blake Griffin jumps over the car, immediately is the biggest star of the beginning of this decade. It's him, it's Derrick Rose, it's LeBron James. Those are the names that you think of when you think about the NBA at the start of this decade. Chris Paul shows up. All of a sudden, we're talking about a 2-man game of Lob City. Blake Griffin, if you look at his numbers, 21 points per game, 8 rebounds, 4 assists, 21 points per game in the playoffs, 8.5 rebounds. He got a lot of flack for not being dominant enough in a lot of people's minds in the playoffs. But I'll say this for Mr. Blake Griffin, that Doc Rivers, not known for holding players back. He's gotten a lot better at letting people go, letting them play their game. But with Blake Griffin, I thought that they made a big mistake, because his game didn't have to just be a dunker. His game didn't have to just be a small ball 5. He could have been a lot more in LA if they would have played him right. He turned into a small ball 5, but he could have easily been a point forward. In 2014, the year that Kevin Durant won the MVP, Blake Griffin and Chris Paul both got first place MVP votes. Chris Paul had gotten hurt. Blake Griffin has kept the Clippers afloat. I thought for sure that Blake Griffin was going to win the MVP that season. I loved what KD was doing. I thought Westbrook was pretty good too. I thought that was going to split the votes. I thought Blake Griffin had done enough that season to win the MVP. His peak, is hard to argue that his peak in LA is not as high, smaller than anybody else on this list. Blake Griffin, number 11 on the list. At number 10, we're getting to the top 10. This is really where we're splitting some hairs. This is where it's rough. This is where it's the amount of seasons that you played, what the impact was for the entirety of your time this decade. If you only played a handful of seasons this decade, I can't put you this high on the list. But if you played all 10, like the majority of these guys in the top 10, you're going to get a little bit higher. At number 10, Damian Lillard. Lillard has hit 2 huge shots to end, honestly, favorites to win the title. He hit the big shot against the Houston Rockets. I thought it was the biggest shot in Portland Trailblazers history. I thought that the Brandon Roy shot was incredible as well, but I thought that the fact that Lillard was so young, I thought that the fact that Lillard had not yet really been proven, he hits the shot over Chandler Parsons, and you can see just the, I don't want to call it grief, I don't want to call it sadness, but it was washed over. The only guy smiling on the court was Dwight Howard, and it's because Dwight Howard was thinking, damn, that was a good shot. The shot that Dame hit over Chandler Parsons will forever be in the minds of not only Houston Rockets fans, it will be in the hearts of not only Portland Trailblazers fans, but it'll be in the spirit of NBA basketball this decade. That when you're talking about clutchness, when you're talking about the incredible shots that were hit this decade, in this particular time, the Lillard shot stands up in the same conversation as the Ray Allen shot, the Kyrie Irving shot, the LeBron James game winners. This shot, incredible. I didn't think I'd ever see anything as good from Dame Lillard again. Then he destroys the Oklahoma City's chances of making any type of impact in the playoffs. He hits the longest shot I've seen ever in Paul George's face. I've never seen Paul George get shot over like that. Now, According to Georgia, it was a bad shot. According to the majority of NBA fans, I think that we would say that's probably not a great shot. But Lillard is the unique case. He's one of the only players who has consistently been brought up in the same conversation as another guy higher on this list. I remember in 2015 when Steph Curry was winning his first MVP that the argument was, if you put Dame Lillard on the Warriors, would the Warriors still be great? And I was on the board of saying no. I thought Curry was incredible talent. I thought he was super special. I didn't think anybody else could run an offense like that. Then, of course, they win 73 games the next year. That kind of quelled a lot of the talk. But then they go on this run where they win back-to-back. And Dame Lillard was still incredible. And I remember having the same conversations with the same group of people, saying, hey, if you put Dame Lillard on the Warriors, I bet the Warriors would still win these titles. Well, it's hard to argue. Clay's an incredible talent. Kevin Durant's a top 5 player. Draymond, pretty good. Iggy's a very talented six-man. And Steve Kerr is a great coach. It's hard. You could probably put anybody in the point guard position. Any all-star in the point guard position, that team would work. Of course, Curry's special, and that's not taking anything away from him, but I'm saying Lillard is pretty great. But then we got in the conversation recently with some of my friends. In a group chat, we were talking about who is the players that you could take off their current teams and put them on a non-playoff team, and that playoff team not only would be lessened, that team that you took them off of would miss the playoffs, but the team you put this player on would be competing for the playoffs or just be more fun to watch. And I said this. I said Dame Lillard is on the short list of guys that if you took them off their current team and put them on the New York Knicks, that the Knicks not only would be more fun to watch, they might compete for a playoff spot. Because I think that that's the type of talent that he has. I think that's the type of culture shift that he has. Him, Jimmy Butler, is another guy who are just gritty. And maybe it's the Oakland showing, maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, but I tell you this, that watching Lillard play for the Trailblazers has been so refreshing. And we got lucky to see him every year this decade. We've seen him since his rookie year coming out of Weber State. And he has been a staple of the NBA. He's not had any major injuries. He's been able to stay healthy. He has been one of the most fun guys to watch. That is why he's number 10 on this list. At number 9, a guy who is going to go down in the history books. When the books are written about the NBA in this decade, he's going to go down as the biggest, greatest steal in NBA history. It's not going to be Scottie Pippen. It's not going to be any of these guys who got drafted in the second round. It's going to be how you let a generational talent slip to 13. And that's what the Milwaukee Bucks did. They were able to get Giannis Antetokounmpo at number 13. He plays 7 seasons this decade, number 9 on our list, averaging 20 points, 4 assists, 8 rebounds, 23 points and 10 rebounds in the playoffs. He won an MVP last season. This season he was on track to winning another one. He has the fewest all-star appearances in this group. Of the 19-1, he has the fewest all-star appearances in this group. Well, why is he so high? Well, let me tell you. The fact that his game has progressed every single season. Okay, that's really hard to quantify, but I'm telling you, if you've watched basketball, if you know basketball, if you're watching in and out, you know that this guy isn't just a dunker. If you watch NBA Twitter, anytime Giannis is conversated about, when he gets talked about, there's 2 camps. It's a camp of, oh, this guy's really special, he's a generational talent, and there's the camp of, this guy just dunks and passes the ball. He's pretty good defensively, but he's not better than LeBron or KD. I think at this point, I still think LeBron is the best player in the league. I would have given him the MVP. But if you said to me Giannis is going to win 7 MVPs in his career, I wouldn't be shocked. I wouldn't be surprised. If he continues to get better and better, and the NBA votes on what is actually happening on the court, not storylines, I think that he's going to be the best player of not only next decade, but he's going to get on the next decade's list as well. That he's going to be a guy playing in his 40s. Because he can play the 4, he can play the 5. If he takes care of his body, if he doesn't have any major injuries, he could be the type of player who is impactful for years and years to come. He's number 9 on the list. At number 8, a dude who played the majority of his career so far in New Orleans. He revitalized this franchise after Chris Paul left. I think you could easily say that he's been a top 8 player. He has never won an MVP award. That might have changed this season if the Lakers were able to win the title. I thought that he was going to be potentially the finals MVP. He doesn't love playing the 5, which bothers me a lot. I think that he'd be a great small ball 5, but it makes sense that Frank Vogel has only played him in that position when completely necessary. I'm talking about Anthony Davis. Anthony Davis, 8 seasons in this decade, 8 seasons in this decade, 8 on our list, 24 points per game, 10 rebounds, 30 points in the playoffs, 12 rebounds. He had that incredible series against the Warriors, and I want to say 2015, 2016-ish. That was an amazing series. But him taking over the game in Portland and really just taking control and saying, hey, I can still be the best player in the league when I want to. I can still be incredible talent. He comes in this league getting compared to Tim Duncan. I never think that that's fair. I never want to compare a guy to Tim Duncan or Kobe or LeBron. It's wrong. We should stop. Zion, we need to stop with these type of comparisons to these all-time great players because all we're going to do is disappoint ourselves. But Anthony Davis is the closest thing to living up to those expectations. LeBron getting compared to MJ, that probably would be the closest all-time. But when we talk about the comparison of Anthony Davis to these all-time great big men in a league that has rapidly changed from, we need you to block shots and hit jumpers, to, okay, now we need you to be able to play on the perimeter and defend the perimeter, to now being a guy who has to shoot threes, has to initiate the offense, has to be able to make crisp passes, has to be able to not only play low, but also play the high post, but also pick and roll, but also be the roll man, but also be the ball handler. He has done what no player has been able to do, master all those things. The pick and roll with LeBron and Anthony Davis has been amazing to watch. I was very skeptical when they brought AD in. I said, how are you going to get a guy who hasn't been able to play a full season? How are you going to get a guy that has continued to be injured and put him next to LeBron, a guy who just came off I'm not going to say it wasn't a serious injury, but he's been banged up. Making 8 straight finals is hard to do, period. But I was skeptical, and he has shown to me that he is an incredible talent. Should have won an MVP the year James Harden won. I thought that he was the better player that season. Anthony Davis, 8 on the list. Number 7, another guy who's never really been able to get over the hump. I wanted to see him compete and win a title. I was sad that it was with the Houston Rockets that he came the closest. If we want to say Chris Paul getting hurt in that 2017 season is the reason that the Houston Rockets lost in the Western Conference Finals, I feel like that's fair. I feel like every time that Chris has gotten hurt in his career, his team has tanked, except that one time that Blake Griffin was peaking. That made sense. But I will say this for Chris Paul, that at number 7, 18 points per game, 9 rebounds, 9 assists, 4 rebounds. In the playoffs, 20 points per game, 8 assists. One of the best assist mans in NBA history. He is going to go down when this is all said and done as the best point guard not to win a ring. I think that he's going to surpass John Stockton when we talk about just the ability to initiate an offense. He's done everything. Him, Steve Nash, John Stockton, guys who didn't win a ring, weren't able to get over the hump, but incredible motors. I want to say for Chris Paul, his ability to play defense, underrated defensive player. In this decade, he got this bad rap of being a guy who complains to the refs too much. And that's fair. I say that that's a fair argument to be made for him. But Paul has been the best point guard of this decade outside of one guy. There's one guy who I would say surpassed him at the point guard position and got there very quickly. At number 6, an NBA mercenary. If he wins a title this year, whenever the NBA comes back, if he's able to finish this season with an NBA title, winning 3 titles with 3 teams, winning a title for a city of champions, and his franchise is really the only franchise who hasn't been able to win anything in that city. I'm talking about Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi Leonard in 2017 was on his way to winning another Finals MVP. Kawhi Leonard in 2017 got the Spurs to the Western Conference Finals. In a year without Tim Duncan, the first year in the franchise in 19 seasons that Tim Duncan wasn't playing for the San Antonio Spurs, Kawhi Leonard took the torch from Duncan and said, I'm going to be the franchise player for the next 10 to 15 years. That there is not going to be a player better than me wearing a Spurs jersey. An incredible two-way talent, two-time Defensive Player of the Year, two-time Finals MVP. He was the youngest Finals MVP outside of Magic Johnson. But you know all this. The story of Kawhi Leonard is an interesting one. He comes in the league being a defensive-first guy. I thought he was going to be more of Tony Allen than he was going to be of Scottie Pippen. He quickly developed a jump shot thanks to the Spurs system. He quickly turned into one of the, if not the best player in the league at times. And the Nike commercial with who would score, or could Kawhi Leonard stop Kawhi Leonard? Could Kawhi Leonard score on Kawhi Leonard? There hasn't been a better ad campaign since an MJ ad campaign. He went from being a guy that was getting compared to Scottie Pippen. Oh, he's a really good two guy, but I don't think he could be the best player on a championship team. Oh, he's really good, but can he get that next step? Well, he's really good, but LeBron's a little bit better, and Kevin Durant's great, and I don't think that he could be the player to win a title by himself. He went from those comparisons to, is this guy doing something that even MJ couldn't do? Is this guy the closest thing we've had since prime Kobe, being able to score from anywhere on the court? Is this guy better than LeBron and Anthony Davis and Giannis? I think last year's playoff run with the Raptors, destiny was on their side. The ball bounced the right way a couple of times. A couple players went down at the right times for the Raptors. They make some trades. They get some moves. Pascal Siakam got a lot better. Kyle Lowry got a lot better. Marc Gasol, Serge Ibaka, Fred VanVleet, those guys stepped up in a big way. But like I mentioned, you take Kawhi off that team, Raptors aren't winning the title. You take Kawhi off the 2014 team, Spurs aren't winning that title. You took Kawhi Leonard off this Clippers team, just had Paul George coming off shoulder surgery. Clippers aren't winning anything. You put Kawhi Leonard on any team, they're more fun to watch. They're competing for a title. Kawhi Leonard's 6 on this list because the next 5 guys did something he couldn't do, and that's winning a MVP. But if you went just off playoff success, he would be a top 3 guy on this list. Because the playoff success that he had this decade, unmatched. I'll say this for Kawhi, that playing for the Spurs hindered him in one way. And that's the reason why he had to leave. It's because he was never going to be the best player in the league playing for San Antonio. The same way that Tom Brady had to fight and fight and fight to be the best quarterback in the league, the same way that a lot of these guys have to fight and fight and fight their way out of being considered system players, he had to leave the Popovich system. He had to leave the Spurs system to prove, I think, to NBA fans, casual fans, not the ones that have League Pass, not the ones that are watching the Spurs every day. He had to prove to, I think, everybody, media, advertisers, that he is the thing that makes the Spurs run. That's not the other way around. I wish that somebody would have told Kawhi that nobody talks about Phil Jackson when they mention Michael Jordan's greatness. Nobody mentions Phil Jackson when we talk about Kobe Bryant's greatness. Nobody mentions Pat Riley when we talk about Dwayne Wade's greatness. Nobody mentions the head coach. When we talk about coaching, yeah, we'll mention how good they were at game planning, how good they were at managing talent, how good they were at setting up plays. We'll mention them then, and how Phil had Kobe and Shaq and Magic and Pippen to work with. We'll mention Magic and Kareem and all those great Knicks and Heat players when we talk about Pat Riley. But nobody mentions the coaching when we talk about the greatness of players. Kawhi could have been the same spot on this list if he played in San Antonio. But he didn't. He went an incredible finals run with the Raptors, and he's going to set himself up for success anywhere he goes. He's the closest thing we've gotten to prime Jordan and prime Kobe, just the way that he's able to play basketball, the way he's able to stop the other team's best player. His peak on defense is better than anybody else's peak going onto this list on defense. 2-time Defensive Player of the Year. 2-time Finals MVP. No time MVP at the regular season. And I will say this for Kawhi, that if he's able to continue playing at this level for the second half of his time in the NBA, he'll be a very special player. All right, moving on to number 5, Mr. Triple-Double. It's Russell Westbrook. Him, James Harden, Steph Curry. Not a lot of room separating those 3 players. So we're going to bunch them all up. At 5, it's Russ. At 4, it's Harden. At 3, it's Curry. Curry, 2-time MVP, motor of the 73-win Warriors. His win shares, if you look, him and Westbrook and Harden are all in that same type of conversation. It's Westbrook's got 73 on the win share column. Harden has 93. I'm sorry. Harden has 90. Or Westbrook's got 93. Harden's got 128. Curry has 98.6. Honestly, the advanced stats favor Harden to be the best player. He has 1 MVP. Russ has 1 MVP. Neither of them have any sort of final success, any playoff success. And that's really what separates Curry from the rest of them. All of these 3 of these guys have one thing in common, though. And that is what I think makes them all unique. So I judge them, another way to judge a player is how he plays with other superstar talent. And granted, Harden was being a 6th man when he played with this guy. Curry got him in his prime. Westbrook got him in his prime. Kevin Durant, the way that they were able to play with Durant, I think, really separates them. Durant is a unique case because he's going to take the most shots because he's the best player. So when you're playing with him and you're on this list and you're a top 5 guy in the decade, how do you play with a guy who is just better than you? How are you able to not only you benefit from playing with such a great player, but also make the team and also make the great player benefit from playing with you? And Curry did it the best. And I know that that's weird, and I know that a lot of people might not love the way that you're splitting that up. Harden and Westbrook fans probably are tearing their hair out right now. But I'll say this, that the way that Curry was able to not only advance his game, not only be able to become a better passer, become a better court general, he was able to take Durant to that next level and expand Durant's game and be a leader. When LeBron went to Miami, it was LeBron's team. Okay, everybody bow down to LeBron. Dwayne Wade owns the city. It's LeBron's city. It's LeBron's head coach. It's LeBron's general managing. He gets the players he wants. Everybody fits around him. When Durant went to Golden State, it was still Curry's team. Nobody was saying, hey, Kevin Durant, should we get this trainer or this trainer? Hey, Durant, how do you feel about this coach? No, it was Curry's team. It's Curry's city. And he was able to make Durant feel welcome. He was able to make it work with Durant. And they won 2 titles. That doesn't happen a lot. People just act like that 2017 run that they went on to win the title and be this special team. People act like that's easy. It's not easy. It's not easy to win a title. If it was, Westbrook and Durant would have done it. And they didn't. And that's why Westbrook's 5 on this list. Harden, if it was so easy, if it was such a pleasure to play with Durant, he would have found a way to continue to play with him. But he didn't. He wanted his own team. Goes to Houston, has incredible success there. He's number 4 on the list. Curry accepted Durant, played 10 seasons this decade, averaged 24 points per game, 6 assists, 4.5 rebounds. Him and Harden, I think, are the 2 closest players on this list, really, to separate the 2. Westbrook's triple-doubles puts him ahead of Kawhi, doing something nobody else has been able to do. But I like the way that this list is set up. Westbrook 5, Harden 4, Steph Curry 3. Now, 1 and 2 are interesting. 1 and 2 are interesting because Durant averaged the most points per game this decade, but he wasn't able to do what LeBron did, and that is bring a city that was starving for a title, its first title. He wasn't able to take over a city and change the landscape the way that LeBron was able to change the landscape of the NBA when he went to Miami. Durant averaged more points per game in the playoffs. LeBron averaged more assists, more rebounds. LeBron has 2 MVPs. Durant's 1. When you look at the win shares, it's 117 to 115. When you look at the value of a replacement, it's 64 to 56. When you look at the win shares, when you look at the defensive win shares, LeBron wins all the advanced analytics. analytics. It's hard to separate the two. But I've said from the beginning that I think that LeBron not only is the best player of this decade, not only is the best player all time, but he's the best teammate all time. LeBron 1, KD 2. While KD owns the head-to-head matchup this decade, he lost in 2012, wins in 17 and 18. I'll say this, that if you told me in a vacuum, the aliens are coming down, we need one player, LeBron has a tweaked ankle, I still would feel comfortable with KD. That's how close this is. KD getting hurt, tearing his Achilles, that holds him back too. He didn't play this last season, so this season does not count for him. So when you look at the top 5, Harden played 10 seasons, Curry played 10 seasons, Westbrook played every season this decade, LeBron played every season this decade. LeBron made the playoffs, or made the All-Star game, every season this decade. He's the only player to do that. He's the only player to be able to do that. So that's going to do it for the show. Great content also out right now. We're talking Film Friday, Pete Davidson's new movie. We're doing a sports grab bag to end the week. What are the biggest sports news of the week? And we're going to do more coronavirus stuff as this disease develops, as this virus spreads. So thank you so much for listening. It's been a lot of fun to talk about this decade's best players. Tune in next week when we talk about the 2000s, when we reminisce about the best players from the 2000s. So tune in for that next week. Thank you guys so much. I will talk to you next week.